Hi, my name is Janelle Prophet, and this week I am doing my book review on historical fiction, and I chose the book Out of the Dust by Karen Hesse. This book, I felt that the genre of historical fiction, due to the time period that it was talking about the Great Depression and about the Dust Bowls that happened in Oklahoma City. The book is written like a diary by a 14-year-old girl, and it starts from the winter of 1934 and ends in the winter of 1935. It depicts the struggles that they felt with their crops not being able to grow due to the dust and the amount of poverty that was happening because of also the Great Depression. It has a theme of enduring, finding forgiveness, and finding love again after loss. I thought the values that it did have in there too were wonderful, with the time period of struggling, their hardships. They lost friends because they were needed to move because they could not grow any more crops. So they got to endure many things throughout the book. The story is about Billie Jo, and she is 14 years old, and this is when she writes about her life from 14 to 15. It's about a time in the beginning where they're very excited. They've been waiting a really long time to have a brother or a sister in her family. Her mom struggled for a long time to have another baby, and now they're going to have a baby after the summer, and they're very excited. Her mother is an accompanist pianist and has taught Billie Jo to play the piano, and she plays very well. She was invited to play at a concert hall and for commemorating the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and she just thought that was so amazing. And one day she says, "I'm going to actually play for the president." I like the way that the book is written. It's in diary form, so it's very easy to read. It tells the date and the month and the year that she writes the things down about her life in here. The story is happy, even though they're struggling, but it comes to a point where it's very sad. They are at home, and her mother sees that there is a pail next to the stove, and she thinks it's water, but it's actually kerosene that the dad left there. So she's trying to prepare coffee for the father. And when she goes to do that, of course, things catch on fire. So her mother runs out of the house to get the father. And Billie Jo, trying to help, throws the kerosene outside the house, but it lands on her mother, which her mother gets burned. And Billie Jo's trying to put out the fire on the mother. And in that frame, she burns all of her hand severely badly. And the mother is burned severely as well. And in the meantime, she does end up giving birth to a baby boy, but she died. The mother died during childbirth, and the little brother only lives a few days. And I wanted to read you a little bit of that from the book. And it says, "My father's sister came to fetch my brother, even as Ma's body cooled. She came to bring my brother back to Lubbock to raise him as her own, but my brother died before Aunt Ellis could get here. She wouldn't even hold his little body. She barely noticed me, and as soon as she found my brother dead, she had a talk with my father. Then she turned around and headed back to Lubbock. The neighbor woman came and then wrapped my baby brother in a blanket and placed him in Ma's bandaged arms. We buried them together on the rise Mom loved, the one she gazed out from the kitchen window, the one that looks out over the dried-up Beaver River. Reverend Bingham led the service. He talked about Ma, but what he said made no sense, and I could tell he didn't really know her. He never even heard her play the piano. He asked my father to name my baby brother. My father hunched over, said nothing, and I spoke up in my father's silence. I told the Reverend my brother's name was Franklin, like our president. The woman talked as they scrubbed death from our house. I stayed in my room, silent on the iron bed, listening to their voices. Billie Jo threw the pail, they said. An accident, they said. Under their words, a finger pointed. They didn't talk about my father leaving kerosene by the stove. They didn't say a word about my father drinking himself into a stupor while Ma withered, begging for water. They only said Billie Jo threw the pail of kerosene. August 1934. And this begins her struggle to find forgiveness not only for herself, but for her father. And they become strangers for a very long time in the house, even though they're working together side by side. She also notices that her father has spots on her skin, like her grandfather did, and her grandfather had died of skin cancer. So she decides that she's not going to live in a house where her father's going to die. So she decides to leave, and she runs away to Flagstaff, Arizona. And when she's there, she realizes that the dust still followed her. Everything that she knew, everything that she was was the dust. The dust was never going to leave. And she decides that she needs to go back. And she goes back, and her father rekindle their relationship, and they learn to get along. And her father finds friendship with a teacher named Louise, and they become good friends. And Billy Joe just loves her and wants her to join their family. And so it's really an enduring story of enduring to the end, finding joy in all of your hardships and all of your pains and all of your sorrows, and seeing the beauty that comes within. And I just wanted to read you one more part of the book. And it says, Daddy started talking about planting the rest of the acres in wheat, but then said, no, let's just go with what we have, what we've got right now. I've been playing a half an hour every day, making the skin stretch, making the scars stretch. The way I see it, hard times are not only about money or drought or dust. Hard times are about losing spirit and hope and what happens when dreams dry up. The tractor's busted and we don't have cash to fix it, but there's nothing saying Daddy can't do the work by hand. It can't be any harder than digging a hole 40 by 6 by 6 feet deep. Daddy bought a second mule with Louise's help, her betrothal gift to him. He walks behind the team step by step, listing the fields to the right and fighting the wind. Maybe the tractor lifted him above the land. Maybe the fields didn't know him anymore, didn't remember the touch of his feet or the stroke of his hand or the bones of his knee, or why should wheat grow for a stranger? Daddy said he'd try some sorghum, maybe some cotton, admitting as how there might be something to this notion as a diversification folks were talking about. And yes, he'd bring the grass back, like Ma wanted, when he wasn't planting anything else. He'd make new sod and learning, watching Daddy, that you can stay in one place and still grow. I wipe the dust out of the roasting pan. I wipe dust off Ma's dishes and wait for Daddy to drive in with Louise, hoping she'll stay a little later, a little longer, waiting for the day when she says for good. She wears a comical hat with flowers in December, and when she smiles, her face is full of a springtime. It makes her hat seem just right. She brings apples and a snack. Perfect apples she arranges in a bowl on the shelf, opposite the book of poetry. Sometimes while I'm at the piano, I catch her reflection in the mirror, standing in the kitchen, soft-eyed, while Daddy finishes chores, and I stretch my fingers over the keys and I play. December 1935. And it's just a wonderful book. And when Karen Hesse wrote the book, people were like, why are you going to write about historical fiction? Nobody wants to read that. But she just fell in love with writing stories that had factual things from history. And this is her third book. And this is also a Newbery winner also book. And it was just a beautiful story. And I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy it too. Thank you.